Hello, I'm John Beltime and I'm the founder of the BodyTalk system. And on this video I'm going to be talking about BodyTalk Access. Now, just a little bit of history here. The BodyTalk system has been around for quite a long time now. I started teaching my first classes in the mid-90s, and it has expanded and grown into a very major part of the healthcare system, specializing in state-of-the-art scientifically based energy medicine. And as a result, it's expanded into many different fields, and we have BodyTalk practitioners who are medical doctors and specialists, chiropractors, acupuncturists, massage therapists, and even lay people. And it's grown to the point that we have practitioners in around 40 odd countries in the world, and we're teaching it in 11 languages. Now, from that side of things, the BodyTalk system has been going very well, and as I said, it has become a state-of-the-art system of healthcare. However, there was one thing missing from it, and that thing that was missing was something that has always been very near and dear to me. I've been involved in healthcare all my life, and the one thing I had always wanted and always looked at was this whole business of personal responsibility. I was brought up in a sort of a situation of aunts and uncles who were all farmers, and they were basically self-reliant. They grew not only their cows and they made their milk and everything, but they had their veggie crops and their herb gardens and things like that. And if someone got sick, there was always some formula, some herb they could use to make people better. So the case was they rarely went to a doctor unless it was something pretty serious, the horse jumped on them or something like that. And I know my own mother used to use a lot of those home remedies on me. Mind you, some of them were absolutely ghastly. Her favourite, of course, being castor oil. And if you have to take castor oil, you won't get sick. It's a good deterrent, I guess. But the key element, though, is I believe that in our society we have become far too reliant on a medical system that has become more and more complex, harder and harder to understand. And we also went through many decades where we put the medical profession on a pedestal and it was like the doctor was God, and we didn't dare question him, and we did whatever they said and took whatever they said because we believed that they would know best. And of course, history has told us that a lot of mistakes have been made, a lot of drugs have been given out that had a lot of bad side effects, and that's still happening. And of course, what has also happened is a lot of over-servicing, where we're getting so much done. So you can sort of go to the hospital with a head cold and end up with $2,000 of bills of doing MRIs and X-rays and God knows what to make sure you don't have a blocked sinus or a tumor or something. And in a wealthy country, they've sort of got away with it to a large extent, but that is changing, and it's something that we need to do something about. And it's something I've always felt we need to do something about, not just from the economics point of view and from the safety point of view, but from the personal responsibility of people realizing that they should look after themselves better, that prevention is better than cure, and that so many things can be avoided if you address the simple things at an early stage and use simple therapies, non-invasive therapies that can help you through a minor problem and stop it from ever becoming a major problem. So a couple of years ago, I started working on some of the key techniques in the BodyTalk system, ones that have been there for a long time, that had developed a really big reputation for their dramatic impact as standalone techniques. And I put them together as a little package that I called BodyTalk Access, and it involves around 6 techniques. And these techniques are very simple, they're easy to learn, and they're non-invasive. And the concept of them, that if you do them as a formula, the 6, and to do the whole formula can take maybe 8 minutes, probably 10 or 15 when you first start doing it and you've first learned it, but once you've learned it and been doing it for a few weeks, you can get it down to a much shorter time. And when you do it, you cover a broad spectrum of complaints that when addressed properly, dysfunctional parts or happenings in the body, that when addressed can bring about profound changes in the health, not only on a preventative medicine basis, but also in the treatment of a wide variety of conditions. Now, I'm going to go through this in a little bit more detail with you, but the concept of the BodyTalk Access is that we are now teaching this to people throughout the world. We're teaching it to people within a family, within a community, within a village. And by teaching members of a community and certain people within a village, what we're finding is those members can use this technique safely and very effectively on members of the village for a wide variety of illnesses when they come up. And in fact, what we're finding over the last couple of years, that on average we would say that this simple set of techniques is taking care of anything up to 60% of the types of problems that come up on a week-to-week basis within any family or community. Now, when you think about it, this is huge, because it means that you can effectively, dramatically cut the healthcare costs of that community and of that family. Now, it's not going to cut it by 60%, because very often the things we're treating are things that aren't all that costly to treat even with traditional medicine. And the most expensive stuff is heart surgery and things like that. It's still going to take up the bulk of costs, but at the same time, the cost saving is significant. Not only that, the time saving. I remember this striking home to me in a very powerful way. I've traveled all around the world, and I don't know how many countries, maybe 70 countries, and in third world countries there's a certain expectation. You go through India and South America and Africa like I have, and certainly we see the enormous need for it in the isolated communities and villages where they really don't have medical care. And if someone gets ill enough and sick enough, some of them, they've got to walk 20 miles often to see a nurse. And if they need a doctor, they've got to wait for a lot longer, oftentimes a week, before they can even see a doctor. And obviously this needs to be addressed. But I remember it hitting home to me strongest a few years back when I was in Chicago. I was in the southern suburbs where we were doing a program on some of the access techniques working with children with learning disorders and behavioral issues by using the techniques on them in their classroom, and being able to demonstrate through interaction with the parents and the teachers the changes in the children. And because, as you'll see later when I explain it, the BodyTalk Access techniques can make a profound difference in learning disorders, reading disorders, attention deficit disorders and behavioral issues with children and of course adults. But while I was there, I was talking to a young woman who was a widow, and she had 2 young children. She was an African American lady who had a part-time job. She was in one of those jobs where they wouldn't hire her full-time, they'd only hire part-time. That way they didn't have to pay her sick pay or holiday benefits and all that type of thing, which is unfortunately fairly typical in the certain areas and economies within the American system. And she had a real issue, because if young Timmy, her son, got ill, say he woke up with a bad fever, she had to make a major decision, because it was a case of, do I take him to a clinic? She knew that if she took him to a clinic, she had to take a day off. Now that meant she didn't get paid that day because she didn't get sick pay. That also meant, literally, that her family had to go without food for that day, maybe even 2 days, because they lived on such a tight budget. And she also knew that when she went to that clinic, her minimum wait would be around 8 hours, her average wait about 12 hours. She'd get there at 8 o'clock in the morning and finally get treated something like 7 or 8 at night. And her first treatment, when little Timmy was there, he'd only get to see a nurse. And the nurse routinely would give him 3 aspirin and give the mother a few more aspirin and say, look, have him take these tomorrow. If he still has a fever in a few days, you can bring him back and we'll let him see a doctor. Now, in the meantime, a whole day was wasted to find this out and to have this type of treatment. You know, this really is a sad story. Even sadder when it's taking place in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And the reality is, in America, which is a great country, but there are at least 40 million people in that type of situation where they have to choose often between healthcare and food, and healthcare, livelihood, and so on. and even in some cases healthcare and their house, because they actually have to sell their house to pay for surgery and so on. Now, it was things like this that really made me determined to get this access program going, get it working, and get it out there. And as it turns out, that's exactly what has occurred. Over the last couple of years, we've now trained many thousands, probably 20, 30,000 people in access throughout the world, in many, many countries. And we're continuing to train people. Now, as I said, the whole concept of access is that when we go into third world countries and we're doing work there, we're not going there just to give them stuff, to give them food or to give them some medication and to help them along. We very much go more on that famous Chinese saying is that, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And we're using that same principle. Rather than just giving handouts like a charity, we're actually training people to be self-sufficient to a large extent. In other words, to be able to take responsibility for their own well-being and to do something proactive about it and make a big difference in their lives. And plus, the way we've set it up is that once we have trained people in the area, once they've been doing it for a fair while, we can then train them to train others. And so after the initial stages of having to send in outside teachers, we can then start having teachers in the areas teaching in their own native language, living in the area, knowing the situation, and allow it to mushroom and grow. And this is what we're doing already in many different countries in the world. We're also, of course, targeting the average family. You see, even middle class, say Australia or America or Europe, there is still economic situations when it comes to healthcare. Very often the healthcare systems, you have to pay for a lot of the treatment anyway, in co-payments. And you don't want to be going for simple things. Plus, there's still a time consumption. You make an appointment with a doctor at 9 o'clock and you're lucky to get in by 10:30, 11, which again means that you've really taken up a lot of time of family member time, and on busy schedules and the way things are at the moment, we can't afford to do this. So the whole idea is that we're also teaching this within families. So we get one or two members of the family who do the course, and then they can address the issue. So if someone wakes up feeling ill, they can do the technique. It takes them 8 minutes. And once the technique is done, they'll know the results because that person is going to be better by the next day. If they're not, and if they're worse, then they know they've got to go to a doctor because it's a more serious condition. But there's a beautiful window there because a lot of people would wait a day before they go to the doctor anyway. And it's the beauty of access. If it is going to work, it works quickly. You're not waiting for a long time. You really do see results often within a few hours, but certainly within a 24-hour period. Now, when I think, okay, this is a very powerful system, but here's one of the great advantages of it, is that you can learn the entire system in just one day, in fact, in 6 hours. And we teach it either as a one-day program or we teach it as a 2-evening program. And so that just in 6 hours, with the help of a manual, we have a lovely, well-illustrated color manual that goes with it, and for a very small cost. In most cases, in major countries, we might charge $100 to $150 for the training. That's US dollars. But when you think about it, for that $150, you're getting free medical care for the rest of your life for so many different illnesses that you can use not only for yourself, but for your friends and family. And if we go into communities, and a local community, we have situations where a local church has set things up. For example, in Mexico, we have a nunnery where we trained a group of the nuns in this Mexican village because they were really doing the first aid and looking after a lot of the villagers, a very, very poor village. And we trained them in access. And what's happening is now is those nuns are looking after those villagers and getting very, very good results, which means they're having to bring in the other doctors and traditional doctors far, far less, and only in extreme cases. And this has made a huge, huge difference. And of course, we were able to train those nuns in just a simple one-day course. We've even found in some of the countries where we go into villages where there's illiteracy, we actually have a different type of manual that doesn't have writing in it. It just has a lot more photos to really, as a photographic essay, as it were, of how to do the techniques, so that when they learn it and they're going away to practice it, they've got a very clear illustration they can follow. And this is exciting for them because we're finding the average people are learning it very quickly. In fact, it's quite funny because some of the stories we're getting from our teachers in Africa. We had one lady she went up into Botswana and she did a class there, and the villagers sent along representatives to learn the techniques. But in typical fashion, in those villages, they brought their children with them. And so during the day, everyone's there together learning the course, and of course the kids were joining in. And they found is by the end of the day, the kids knew it better than the adults. They just picked it up so quickly. And when we're talking about kids, we're talking about sometimes 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds who are actually learning the whole system. And the next day and in the next week, the reports were coming back that they were treating a lot of the people because they had learned it so well and enjoyed doing it and enjoyed the fun. And of course, the safety factor is because you're not giving anything, you're not injecting anything, it's absolutely safe. You can't do anything wrong. Okay, so it's exciting to see all this occurring and how easily it can be learned. Now, what does the Access program cover? It's the 6 basic techniques. The first one includes what we call the cortices. Now, the cortices is probably the most important technique in BodyTalk. And in fact, elsewhere on the site, you'll see there is a actual whole talk just on the cortices, where I also train you how to do the cortices, because I think it's so important that we're trying to train everybody for free in doing the cortices. But it is just one of the techniques of Access, and you learn it. And the idea of the cortices is to get the brain to function a lot better by getting a balance occurring between the 2 hemispheres of the brain. And it's a very simple technique, but extremely powerful. Because when you balance the hemispheres of the brain, you're improving the circulation to the brain, you're improving neuronal synapses and movement of the neurological pathways between the hemispheres and from the brain down to the body. But more, as well as that, we have to remember that a great deal of the brain function is through electromagnetic frequencies and electron transfers and proton transfers and things like this. The brain is like a huge electrical circuit of radio waves, etc. And what's happening is in our society these days, we are having those circuits basically shutting down. It's similar to like a household where you blow a fuse. You overload a circuit, the electrical circuit, through too much stress, and then the circuit just breaks down. It's like the fuses are blown. And eventually the body resets them, but it can take a long time. And in fact, if you're living under stress, it can take a very long time. But what we have found is that with the BodyTalk system, when we do the cortices, we actually reset those fuses, as it were, almost instantaneously. And this, of course, is extremely powerful because it immediately brings the brain back online, as it were, so that it can function better. So therefore, we found that when the cortices is done, it makes everything function better, because once you get the brain functioning better, you get focus, concentration, memory. You find that people with attention deficit disorders are much more lucid, they're much more there. You know, oftentimes when we talk about the cortices have blown, in other words, the circuit breakers have shut down, usually stress-induced and things like that, the person goes into sort of a mini shock state. And it's a type of situation where you'd look at them and say, hello, is anybody home there? And in fact, as you know, if you paramedics will see this a lot in people who have been in a car accident, where they can often be unable to answer questions clearly, and they wander around aimlessly and so on because they're in mild shock. And of course, we also know that it's very important to get them out of shock quickly, because what they've found is that when the body is in mild shock, the system doesn't work well. In other words, the brain doesn't set up the right processes to shut down internal bleeding and to help in the repair or recovery from the injuries. And so this is why it's extremely important to get people out of shock. And one of the wonderful things we've found is that when we've trained paramedics in this technique, by doing the cortices, you literally, in less than a minute that it takes to do the cortices, you can bring a person completely out of shock. They're just so totally there, and suddenly their whole body is going to then function better. They're going to recover quicker. They're going to, their internal bleeding's got a chance of actually shutting down, and healing can occur. We've actually found this same technique is when the brain is misfiring, the circuits are blowing badly, such as in epileptic seizures. And again, when we do the cortices, it stops the seizure. And this is a very, very powerful technique. And we've also seen it in people who are starting to have a stroke, in the early stages of a stroke, while it's occurring. If you actually do the cortices, you actually can stop the stroke and find a very, very quick recovery. Where normally that person could be left with quite permanent damage, they're often left with no damage. And a step further than that is we find that extreme shock is basically shutting out the world, as it were. And another name for that, it could be coma, or is called coma. Now you can have coma for different reasons. Sometimes coma is from brain damage, right, which is more than shock, it's actual brain damage. But some comas are simply severe shock, and where the patient just hasn't come to, they haven't come lucid, they haven't come conscious again. And we've now got documented literally dozens upon dozens of case studies where we've gone into hospitals and used the cortices technique on people in coma, and they've literally come out of a coma within often minutes of having the cortices done. And these are people who have been in coma often for years. So, this has got very powerful applications, and not just in the simple side of shock. And we actually have found that the average person, because of the stresses they're under, whenever you get your phone bills and your other bills and driving in traffic and the stresses of work and fights that are going on with the kids, etc., the stress levels of the body puts people in mild states of shock. It's like your brain shuts down. You can't think clearly. You're thinking through a fog. And this means the body can't heal well. It's under too much stress. And we have found that by simply doing the cortices treatment, we make a profound effect there. Literally, once you do this, for example, on children, we've got projects going in schools where we train the kids to do each other's cortices at the beginning of the school day. And what the teachers have found is that they tap each other's cortices out. They're much more attentive. They're much more enthusiastic about learning. They learn better. Their behavior is much better, and so on. And the concept was just to do it once a day, every day, and track long-term changes. And they've always been very, very positive. But we've also noticed a situation where kids have come in from the school ground where they've had stresses and rough and tumble and things like that, and they've actually asked the teacher, can we do our cortices again now for the afternoon? Because they found that when they do their cortices again after lunch, they've got a clearer head and feel much better and not less sleepy, etc., for the afternoon session. And we have people who have children quite sick with quite severe problems like that, that will run up to their parents and say, Mum, will you do my cortices? I feel like I'm about to have a seizure, or I feel like something's going wrong, or I'm getting a bad headache or something like that. So that's exciting, and that's just one of the access techniques. Another one of the techniques we teach is what we call switching. Now, switching is a very common problem, and it's a situation, again, it's a left and right hemisphere problem, but where there's a confusion between left and right. And this does a lot of things. I mean, the classic person who's switched is the type of person under stress who you say, they're driving and you say, okay, turn right here, and they turn left. Or they're a patient and you say, roll on your tummy, and they roll on their back. In other words, they get things back to front and mix things up. That's what we call switching. Another version of it that is really, when it's really bad, is dyslexia, because they actually get their letters back, so back to front. So they read as T-E-H, and hence they have trouble reading because the letters are always getting back, switched and back to front. And just the same as we find that when we do the cortices and the switching technique, we usually find dyslexia comes under control because they're no longer switching, they're no longer in a state of shock, their brain's working better, and the dyslexia stops. Particularly if it's done on a regular, the techniques are done on a regular basis for a while to actually retrain the brain and solidify the improvement. The other aspects of switching is that I call switching as the self-destruct mode, because you find that when you're in a switching mode, you go into a poor decision-making mode or a self-destruct mode. It'll be like you're on a diet, you're feeling, you're doing really well, and then you get stressed. And stress is the number one cause of switching. You get beyond that stress threshold and you switch, and that's when you'll suddenly go on a binge eating, or you'll start drinking heavily, or you'll do something else that's destructive. Because once you go into that switch mode, there is a tendency to self-sabotage. And you will self-sabotage yourself in a way that you would never have done if you weren't switched. We've found this is extremely important because one of the quickest ways to cause the brain to switch is with strobe lighting. You know, when a fluorescent light flickers, for example, and they've actually shown that in a company where you have a big office and you've got a faulty flickering light, you'll find that until that light is changed by maintenance, and they can often take, as you know, months to do, you're going to find a huge increase in mistakes made. Because when people are sitting under that flickering light, they're going to be going into a switched mode, which means they're going to make wrong decisions. They're going to push the yes button when they should be pushing a no button, and they're going to file things in the wrong way and make sometimes catastrophic mistakes. And of course, we see it really badly when we go into a nightclub situation where you get teenagers, you know, good kids, or level-headed kids, but they go into a nightclub with heavy strobe lighting, and you'll see that after a short period of time, it's like their eyes glaze over, because what they've done is they've gone into this switched mode. And when they go into that switched mode, they're in a self-destruct mode, which means that's when they're going to want to drink too much, or they're going to want to experiment with drugs and things like that, because once you're in that switch mode, you really can't understand right and wrong, and in that way, and your body goes into that incorrect or poor decision-making process. Now, obviously, the key element there is getting rid of the strobe lighting, of course, and reducing the stress levels and so on, but in the meantime, by being able to have that part as part of a formula in Access, it means that on a regular basis you can, you know, correct the balance of the brain with the cortices and then unswitch the person. They're going to function in life far, far better, and be, you know, far better functioning in every way. Now, another technique, the third technique that we use in Access is what we call hydration. Now, we're all aware that our body is like 75% water, our brain about 80% water. So obviously water is very, very important, and it is. It's absolutely critical for neurological functioning and neurological pathways. It's the most important catalyst in the cell for transporting vitamins and electrolytes and everything across the cell membrane, and then within the cell membrane it's involved in energy production. It's all part of the ATP cycle for energy production, and it's a major nutrient and so on. Now, the problem is that what we're finding is the average person is dehydrated. In other words, by that, their water cells are not working properly. You've probably heard the concept of crystalline structure of water. Now, obviously, for water to look like a crystal, you have to freeze it. And when you freeze water, it takes a crystalline shape. We've all seen this. You just got to look at a snowflake. It's a crystalline shape of water. And some of the Dr. Emoto, the famous Japanese guy, who shows how you can freeze different water from different people, and it takes different types of crystalline shapes that often represent their emotional state at the time. So people who are angry have a very, very weird looking crystal versus people who are in love or something like that. What we have found is that it's not so much that shape, but the ability of water to be crystalline as a liquid. In other words, to behave as a liquid crystal. And remember, crystals can be liquid. You know, that's a standard function. That much of the functioning of the cellular metabolism and everything like that works on the basis of water having that crystalline structure. Okay, and what we've found is under stress and many other factors, but again mainly stress, and or poor water consumption, or poor quality water, or badly treated water, you actually have water in the body that is not functioning right. For example, it is not crystalline by nature. So if you freeze it, all you get is a clump. You don't get a crystal. Okay. Now that water will not conduct electrons well. It will not act as a catalyst for chemical reactions. It will not break down into energy and things like this. So effectively, you're not functioning well. And very often you'll feel thirsty, you feel the need for water because you know you're not getting correct nutrition. For example, you're not transporting your vitamins and everything across the cell membrane and so on. So a person can be eating well but actually have malnutrition because their water molecules aren't working well. And of course you see people swallowing water and drinking water all the time, and you're getting told drink plenty of water, but that doesn't often do the job. People can be swimming in water, but if the water isn't behaving properly, and if it isn't moving through the cell membrane properly and things like that, you've just got too much water in your body that's useless to you. Okay? And that's the key. It's not the quantity of water that you're consuming, it's the quality of the water when it gets in there. And the next technique that we do in the Access system is a particular program where we program the limbic system, because we have found that it is emotional stress that seems to upset the crystalline structure of the water. And by balancing the limbic emotional centers of the brain, quite specifically to water as it were, we can cause a recrystallization of the water within the body. And that means it starts functioning properly. And that makes a huge difference in your health as far as nutrition, energy, conduction of nerves, handling of stress, everything like that. So in a world today, hydration problems are serious, really serious. And hence it's why we included it in the Access course, because it is really a critical factor in anybody healing from anything. If you're trying to even just get over a virus or a cold or something, very often it's the poor functioning of the water in the body that stops you from doing that. So hence we have this hydration treatment. Then our next technique that we use is one of the big ones. It's one of the original factors of BodyTalk. It and the cortices were the mainstay of BodyTalk for many years. And it's called our biochemistry treatment. And what this involves is, in conjunction with getting the brain to work better with the cortices, and making sure it's not switched, and making sure we've got good hydration, right, which is part of the formula that we use. Then we've found that what happens, again, because of stress over a long period of time, the average person's immune system has been compromised. It's overstressed, it's not working very well. And it's coping with a really serious problem. We've got millions of bugs going on, trillions of bugs going on in our system. A lot of them good guys, a lot of them bad guys. But when the immune system is stressed, it's like an army. It's not seeing its targets right. It's not being able to isolate what it needs to do. It's often overreacting to things it doesn't need to react to. And often it's not finishing its job off. So for example, we can come down with a flu virus and we have the flu for a while, but because of the weaknesses of the immune system and the general stress levels of the body, we get over the flu but not fully. And so, we've got rid of the heavy fever and we're sort of back to work, but then we stay chronically tired and chronically a bit achy and a little bit headachy. And it's like, I can't quite shake off this flu, until it actually becomes a long-term chronic situation that we could call chronic fatigue syndrome. And in fact, sometimes called fibromyalgia, although there are many other factors involved in that. But this happens a great deal. And what is happening now in the world is we have so many people who have a lot of chronic bugs in their system. They've got chronic flu viruses, they've got chronic Epstein-Barr or cytomegalovirus or malaria virus and so on. And these are viruses that they've got at some stage and picked up, sort of fought off but never completely. and now they've been left in this chronic low-key viral situation. And this low-key viral situation will give rise to all your classic symptoms of just aches and pains and headaches, that you can put down to sometimes rheumatism and arthritis and everything, but they can get very severe, very debilitating. And in fact, nowadays they tend to get blocked into a nice big term called fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, which is very often, it's a combination of high stress levels, poor functioning immune system, chronic viruses or chronic bacteria or even chronic parasites, overstressed adrenals and so on. And what we've found is that by using the procedures that we're using in BodyTalk Access, in the majority of cases, by simply doing those a few times, we can actually get the body to work through and start repairing all that. In other words, the body will start attacking those chronic viruses and actually finishing the job off and getting rid of them completely. And it won't do them all at once, of course. But if you then do the access techniques sort of as a preventative, ongoing thing once a week, over a period of time, your body will work through all these chronic viruses and chronic things you have in your system and gradually detox your system of them. Now, the types of things this works on is not just your viruses, it works on bacteria. It also works on parasites, particularly what we call microparasites, which are the little baby, tiny things you can only see under a microscope that can get up through the nostrils into the brain, they can get into the bloodstream, they can get into organs, and they colonize, and they can be there for years. And you could have someone with a colony of parasites in their adrenals that doesn't cause a disease in its own right, but that colony is like a pressure in there and a fatigue in there that will cause the adrenals to start chronically under-functioning. So you'll get chronic fatigue because you've got chronic adrenal insufficiency, and hence poor stress handling and so on. Or I've seen them get into the pituitary gland, for example, and cause massive problems with the endocrine system. I remember one woman she was only 33 and hadn't had a period for over 8 years, and she was having all sorts of other endocrine problems, underactive thyroid, etc. And I treated her for microparasites, with this body chemistry treatment and the cortices and so on. And literally, within the next 2 months, she was back on a regular cycle, having her normal periods, her thyroid was functioning, her health had improved dramatically, her endocrine system had balanced. And the reason was that at some stage or other, she had picked up this microparasite, probably through the ethmoid bone and breathing it in, that got into the pituitary gland and created all sorts of problems. They can get into the brain and create, mimic tumors and give the symptoms of tumors when in fact they're just pockets of parasites. And the beauty is that these things can be addressed. The body will address them. You just have to point them out. And the technique that we teach in Access is designed to do that. And it's also very useful for the acute situation. So it means that when someone in the family comes down with the flu or something like that, you can use the technique, and what will happen is you'll get the body to put maximum effort into getting them over that flu. So instead of them taking a week to get over the flu, they should get over it in a couple of days, because you'll accelerate the whole process. So obviously, this is a very, very important part of BodyTalk Access, the ability to handle those. And by the way, it also will help to detox the body of build-up of toxic substances like mercury and things like that in the system, and lead, and there are so many poisonings occur. And one of the big ones is that because it's addressing the immune system and making it healthy, it will help dramatically in food intolerances and allergies. Now, some allergies are normal, in certain times of the year. Having a runny nose because of certain pollination occurring in the oak trees is fairly normal. But when it's excessive and when it lasts for a long time and you get very ill, that's a different ballgame. That means the immune system is overreacting. And again, this body chemistry treatment is designed to stop that overreaction. And the same way, if the person is allergic to certain foods, we're finding that in most cases, just a simple access treatment use of body chemistry can help that allergy and clear it up. If it's a very severe case, such as like peanut allergies giving anaphylactic shock, very often the access level of our BodyTalk is not strong enough. And in that case, the person would need to go to an advanced BodyTalk practitioner who has many other tools they can use to overcome that, because we do get very, very good results with severe cases of anaphylactic shock from allergies to peanuts and other substances and foods. So body chemistry, very, very important. So as you can see by now, by the time we've got the brain functioning and we've balanced out the switching and we've got the body hydrated and functioning right there, and we've got the immune system functioning, that's going to cover a lot of territory and a lot of diseases. Sure, it doesn't cover some of the really serious ones. If I have a car accident, you're still going to have to go to hospital and see a surgeon. And if you have a heart attack, you need a surgeon to replace some valves or arteries, etc. And we're still going to need drugs for certain conditions and so on. But what I'm getting at is we can do so much for ourselves safely. The final technique in BodyTalk is it's a simple technique that is designed where we touch various parts of the body and do this tapping process that is designed to balance out the posture of the body. And when you balance out the posture and you get the muscle balance right and the ligament balances and everything like that right, you're going to improve the structure of the spine, the posture and the structure of the joints and so on. And this is going to be very, very powerful for treating back conditions and treating musculoskeletal type conditions, because very often, build-up of arthritis in the knees and everything is because the posture is right out of balance and you're wearing out the joints because you're just not walking in the right way. And by balancing all that out, we can make a huge improvement, particularly if it's done in a preventative basis, where you're treating children through the formative years to keep their posture sound, so as they get older, they're going to have a properly functioning body. And another aspect of this technique, what we call the reciprocal technique of access, is we can use it for first aid, because we have a way of simply, if someone injures, say, their elbow badly, by holding what we call the reciprocal, which is the knee on the opposite side, and again doing our famous tapping process we do in BodyTalk, we can actually accelerate the repair of that injury if it's a bad sprain or something like that. And we can use it for burns and cuts and contusions, and it can be very, very dramatic. We've got such wonderful cases. I think one of the most common one we get is the children who get the finger caught in the door and door is slammed and their thumb's still in there, and they bring it out, and under the access system, by simply letting the kid hold their thumb because it's hurting like hell, and us holding the reciprocal, which is the big toe on the opposite side, and doing a tapping process, literally within minutes the pain starts going very quickly. Within 10 or so 15 minutes the kid's really not in much pain at all, and by the next day there's absolutely no sign whatsoever of the injury, when normally that would be black and blue the next day. So the repair can be really spectacular. And that type of work is what we call fast aid in access. And it's so very useful for simple day-to-day things that occur. Once it gets serious, once you start breaking bones and things like that, yes, then you've got to go to the doctor or the hospital and have all the appropriate work done. But in the meantime, we can do so much. So what does this mean? It means that access is going to give us access to a very simple system that can be learnt in one day for very low cost, and can be utilized by members of a family or a community, right? And used on those people in a non-professional way. We tend to call this our non-professional courses for self-help. Although if you're a community member, it may be that you're getting paid to look after that community in that way. It is not a substitute for full medicine. It is not a substitute for the treating of serious conditions with drugs and surgery and all the other techniques. But what it does mean is we can start being proactive about empowering ourselves to take care of all the little stuff, the time-consuming stuff. And also, by using the technique regularly, instead of just waiting for us to get sick, but by using it, by treating each other with this technique, say, once every week, then what we're going to do is gradually re-establish healthier pathways in the brain, reduce the stress levels in the brain, strengthen the immune system, improve the posture. We're going to gradually improve our total health. which means that we're going to ultimately need our access less and less, because we're going to have a higher resistance to disease, a higher resistance to stress levels, less of a tendency to switch or to blow our circuits as far as the brain goes and things like that. So it's a way of maintaining health. Sure, exercise is great, good diet is great, there's no substitute for that. But you know what? Getting the wiring right, getting the brain to function right, getting the immune system to be triggered right, reducing the total stress levels of the brain and of the whole body, they're critical factors. They're something we have to do. And we can do them ourselves in an effective way, not just numb them by taking Prozac or something like that. You know, those things are trying to reduce stress chemically, but they're not really establishing and re-establishing healthy immune systems or healthy brain function. They're basically just deadening our system so that we don't care that we feel lousy. Okay? So let's start doing something really proactive about this. Access is a brilliant way to get involved in BodyTalk. You don't have to become a practitioner, you don't have to study for ages. You can do it in a day. And of course, to me, it's for everybody. Every family, anywhere in the world, should have at least someone in that family with access. And of course, as you may be aware, we part of the BodyTalk system, we have the International BodyTalk Foundation, where we have a program where we have instructors that are going into third world countries and teaching villages in there. And of course, it's very different in those situations because they can't afford to pay. Some of those villages make $5 a month or $5 a year sometimes. So we have people that are going in there and we're teaching the members of the community in the villages for free. And this is our community outreach work that we're doing through our not-for-profit foundation, the International BodyTalk Foundation. And that to us is a very, very important part of our mission statement in BodyTalk. And for my wife and Esther and I, it's a very major part of how we spend our time. And certainly we invite you to learn access yourself, but we certainly invite you to go onto our International BodyTalk Foundation website, which will be right there somewhere on that page where you can click to get onto it, hear about that, and consider making some donations towards it. This very, very good work that we're doing there. Because again, it's not charity work, we're actually teaching people how to look after themselves. We're making a difference in community by making them, proactive in looking after themselves and taking more responsibility for their short-term and long-term health. And you can make a huge difference because, you know, a simple donation of $100 can actually pay for a whole course, for a whole community, a whole village that can be helping everyone in that village for the rest of their lives. And it can make such a difference. And we really encourage you to be involved with that. But in the meantime, look into access further. Go on our website, see where there's an access program going nearby, and I really strongly urge you to go along and learn it. It's a lot of fun to learn, it's very easy to learn, the techniques are ultra simple, and you will just simply have an enjoyable day that will set you up for the rest of your life. Thank you for listening.